Hey gang, welcome to part 2 of the female fat loss interview with Lyle McDonald. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I highly suggest you go listen to that first and then come back and listen to part 2 here. Enjoy it. How often do you sort of see like real legit clinical thyroid issues versus somebody that maybe is just in a scenario like that, having a hard time adhering, or maybe they think they have a sluggish metabolism, or, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, number one, I'm not clinical. Once you get into clinical and pathophysiology stuff, it's not my strong point. A lot of what I've seen is on the internet and things like that. The slow metabolism gets blamed endlessly. This has been around forever, and with very few, not that, hypothyroidism or problems can't exist, and women are actually far more prone to have thyroid issues than men. It's something like 9 or 10-fold more likely to have an issue, which has to do with estrogen. There's a whole lot of things going on there. And I only note in that vein, low thyroid in women is actually the single most underdiagnosed cause of depression. And unfortunately, a lot of classically trained doctors aren't aware of this. So women with depression, they will get put on every antidepressant known to God and man, and nothing will work. And then when they finally get a full thyroid hormone panel, that's what the cause was. So the slow metabolism has been, that claim has been around forever. And invariably, when they measure these folks, it's normal. There's been all kinds of stuff. The BBC loves doing these shows, secret eaters and slow metabolism. And, these women are like, I eat 1,000 calories a day and I'm not losing and I have a slow metabolism. And they go measure them. My metabolic rate is normal. And invariably, what's happening, not universally, right? I'm not dismissing that this can occur. Totally. I'm dismissing that it's a common cause. The more common cause is underestimating calorie intake, which people can do, again, 50 to 70%. Women are like, I eat 1,200 calories. No, you're eating 2,400 or possibly more than that. You think you are. And again, I'm not saying they're lying. They literally, I remember one the BBC did, and they talked to a woman, and she's like, I eat 1,200 calories a day. I exercise and I'm not losing weight. And they added up a single day of her food intake, and it was like 12,000 calories.
Wow, that's extreme. Wow.
Yeah. And I'm not saying it's always the case, but it is commonly the case. And because she was, by the time, she added her 3 big bags of just chips alone, there's 1,200 calories on top of all the other food. But she genuinely believed that she was, because we have no concept of calorie intake or portion sizes anymore. And I'm sort of the, when you hear hooves, think horses, the old medical thing. Always start with the simple stuff first. Now with hypothyroid, with true hypothyroid, and let me get into a little bit of detail with this, just because this is an important distinction. So thyroid hormone metabolism. All right, we've got the hypothalamus. Think of it as just like the global center. It tells everything else what to do. Hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland with something called thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. No, I take that back. It's TRH. Doesn't matter. The hypothalamus tells the pituitary to tell the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormone, because I'm going to get the hormones mixed up. I think the pituitary sends TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. It tells the adrenal gland or the thyroid gland to release thyroid. Now, there's 2 primary forms of thyroid in the body. T4, which stands for thyroxine, which is relatively inactive. I'll be honest, I'm not super up to date on it. I think they're now thinking it has its own effects. But T3, triiodothyronine, that's really the primary metabolic, in terms of metabolic rate, body temperature. T3 is really the key player. T4 may have some other effects in other parts of the body, but it's really just a storage form. There's also a T2 that gets made in skeletal. T3 gets converted to T2 in skeletal muscle. But T4 and T3 are the big ones. So the thyroid gland releases T4. The ratio is about 80 to 20 of T4 to T3. And true hypothyroid, right, in a clinical sense, so you do blood work. And unfortunately, most doctors do an incomplete thyroid panel. Right, they'll measure TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which again, that's the hormone that the pituitary is telling the thyroid gland to release. They'll do T4, and then they'll calculate T3. And this is a problem for a reason I'll explain in a second. So what you would, assuming you did a full hormone panel, here's what you would see in true hypothyroid. You would see low T4, low T3, and high thyroid stimulating hormone. And this will seem kind of this may not make sense. What's happening is the thyroid gland is not responding to the signal that the pituitary is sending. So the pituitary is just trying to send a stronger signal, right? I guess the obligatory car analogy, like let's say that your gas pump isn't working well, right? So you press the pedal and you don't accelerate. So what do? You press the pedal harder. The problem is that the engine isn't doing what it's supposed to because the gas pump, not a perfect analogy, but I think you know what I mean, is that the body goes, oh, T4 and T3 are low. Let's tell the thyroid gland to release it. Oh, it's not. Let's tell it harder. So that's what you would see in true hypothyroid. And that's actually it can be corrected in a couple of ways. There's also something called euthyroid stress syndrome or euthyroid stress sickness, ESS. And unfortunately, I'll explain what that is in a second, but again, classically trained doctors think that this only occurs in like sepsis and surgery and all these health problems. And they're wrong, right? So let's say you did another full blood test. ESS, you would see normal TSH, normal T4, and low T3. And if they did a test, you might see what's called reverse T3. Imagine it's just a mirror version of T3 hormone, which is inactive. Here what's happening is the thyroid gland is releasing T4 completely normally. Normally T4 is converted to T3. The problem is that the T4 is not getting converted elsewhere in the body, mainly in the liver. So again, hypothyroid, high TSH, low T4, low T3. The thyroid gland is not responding. Euthyroid stress syndrome, normal TSH, normal T4, low T3, high reverse T3. The T4 is being sent to an inactive form. Fortunately, if you don't measure T3 directly, you'll never see this. A doc goes, TSH is normal, T4 is normal, it's all in your head. Well, T3 might be low. But if you don't measure it directly, you cannot know this. This occurs as a consequence of dieting. And we've known this for decades, and doctors don't accept it or they're unaware of it. Hell, in the UK, T4 is the only acceptable treatment for thyroid problems. And if it's a conversion issue secondary to dieting, all the T4 in the world won't do anything. Because if the conversion's not working, the conversion's not working. The solution, unfortunately, the easiest solution is just to take thyroid hormone. That's what bodybuilders and physique athletes do. They just take T3. Raising calories, basically liver metabolism has adapted to dieting. It's an adaptation to slow metabolic rate. So the whole part of this is, okay, so in true hypothyroid, and to a lesser degree in ESS, you would see other symptoms. It wouldn't just be the inability to lose weight, which can be usually on average is underestimating calorie intake and overestimating activity. People also think they're doing way more. You've heard it. I saw one on my group the other day. Yep, client of mine, she says she burns 1,100 calories doing hot yoga. Sorry. But amazingly, she's using a Fitbit, and one of the things it measures is temperature. Amazingly, she burns more when she stands under the heater. Interesting. Right. We think we're burning, I did an aerobics class. I must have burned 600 calories. Try 250, maybe 300 for a small woman. Right. Even weight training kind of burns. If you're a large male, maybe. It's for a smaller woman, an hour of weight training, maybe 300 calories, 350 if you're lucky. True hypothyroid, you would typically see things like constantly cold extremities. And women already run colder, but body temperature is very low. Energy levels are very low. Depression is common. Hair loss is common. There's going to be a whole cluster of symptoms that are going to be present if true. The thing is, these also develop with ESS, right? People, when they diet, are just like, why am I cold all the time? Because your body has reduced metabolic rate. You can actually track body temperature, morning body temperature, to track metabolic rate during a diet. Again, here's another problem women have. In the luteal phase, metabolic rate goes up a little bit. So does morning body temperature. Women have monitored what's called basal body temperature for years because at ovulation, body temp goes up by 0.3 to 0.6 degrees centigrade or about 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit. It's about half a degree from normal. And that's an indication that the woman's ovulated. And that's a time where she can get knocked up if that's her goal. So That's normal but when you're dieting, your normal morning body temperature, if it's dropped but for every degree centigrade or 2 degrees Fahrenheit, it's about a 10 to 15% reduction in metabolic rate.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah. And that's not, so you'll tend to see, and again, women are a little bit colder to begin with. This is a reduction from normal. So in true clinical hypothyroid, you see this whole cluster of symptoms, not just I'm dieting and I can't lose weight, I must have a sluggish metabolism, because pretty much when they've measured, and I just tell people, like, I love being wrong, my general image to the contrary. Whenever I see this, I go, I have a client who's eating 1,200 calories, not losing weight. Yeah, no, they're not. Are you sure? Pretty sure. Well, they say they are. I don't care. I'm not saying they're lying. They think they are, but that's the key. They think they are.
Right.
They're not. And I go, but it's real simple. And if they maintain this, go fine. Send them to a hospital, send them to somewhere that will do resting metabolic rate. Just prove me wrong. Go get them measured. And I guarantee you that they'll have a normal metabolic rate within averages, because that's I'd love to be wrong, but I'm like, if you found that person that's truly eating 500 calories a day and truly not losing weight, well, you've now found a human fusion reactor and you have solved the world's energy problems. It doesn't work that way. Over the short term, water retention will mask it, but it does not work that way. Human metabolic rate cannot adapt more than about 30%. There's a reason fat people, you don't find overweight people in third world countries where there's no food or coming out of concentration camps. I'm sorry, your client is not the metabolic exception. Now, and even then, hypothyroid, depending on the degree of it, it may only be a 10 to 20% reduction in resting metabolic rate, which is significant. It makes it more difficult. Also, low thyroid causes water retention. Here's the other big variable, which this is also when you're dieting hard and get closer, that low thyroid contributes to everything else to cause water retention, which starts to mask things. So if you've got a hypothyroid client, they may need to reduce calories or increase activity more if they don't fix it. Just because if you've lowered their resting metabolic rate, lowered their total energy expenditure, well, it will be harder. No doubt. They're still not metabolic exceptions, and they're also more likely to hold water, which may mask the results over the short term. But over the long term, if they're truly eating a deficit, you can't escape you can't escape thermodynamics, no matter how often people want to. So yeah, it can be there, but like I said, when you look for the easy stuff first. If you don't see that cluster of symptoms, like I said, just get them to track their food intake for a week, and I bet it'll be really illuminating. It always is. Absolutely, yeah, and those are great points. And I think the take home there is like, we tend to underestimate calorie intake and overestimate the calories we burn. So, like Lyle said, really dial things in for a period of time, and if there are those telltale signs of those thyroid issues, then go get checked out, and then you'll know for sure. Well, there's a favorite study back when they could do shit like this, and you can't do this. You can't do the fun studies anymore because of ethics. And it was like the 70s, and they took a bunch of women that swore they were diet resistant. They swore up and down and sideways that they could not lose weight, and they basically locked them in a hotel for about a month, and they controlled every calorie they consumed. Everybody lost weight. Yeah, it was really just that simple, and it just was. It's like that's what it came down to. And even like to not getting off, I could rant about Gary Taubes for hours too. But, part of what drove good calories, bad calories was a study from the 1980s by George Bray, one of the old men of obesity research. He's been around forever. And what they identified was that both lean and overweight people reported eating the same number of calories. Now, I picked my words very carefully there, and the conclusion was therefore, what Taubes took away from this was if they're eating the same amount, there must be another cause for the obesity. Well, after that book broke, George Bray wrote a very scathing criticism of it, and he said, "Yeah, here's the thing: our 1980 study was wrong." Because as we did more work, which Gary Taubes claims he did 5 years of intense research. Yeah, he did 5 years of intense research till he found what he wanted to hear, and then he fucking stopped. Because he apparently never read anything past 1980, or he would have known that They reported eating the same number of calories. They weren't eating the same number of calories. They were misreporting. And the data on this is immense. And George Bray said, that's the thing. Our data was wrong. Once we started looking in detail, we found that they were misreporting their calories by 50 to 70%. And it goes up with increasing body weight. And again, Taubes just seems to have never come across any of that literature in his 5 years of in-depth research. But yeah, so that's usually what it is. And if it's not, if you've nailed that down, then yeah, go get a metabolic. There can be goofy stuff going on. But for the most part, everybody wants to have a metabolic defect, and we don't.
Right. So for most folks, it's the exception, not the rule. So
yeah, basically. So, and as I like to joke, everybody on the internet thinks they're an exception, but that's not what that word means.
Right. So shifting gears a little bit here, and you touched on earlier in our chat about metabolic slowdown as we age. I think it will be super useful for women approaching menopause or going through menopause themselves, and how that changes things from a physiological perspective with fat loss.
Right. So this is, yet another complexity of women. Men have very slight age-related changes, right? We have higher testosterone in our 20s, starts to drop a little bit, with every passing decade. I love the commercials that say doctors call it low T, because no, they do not. And, by the time you're in your 60s, a male's testosterone has dropped whatever percentage, but it's qualitative, right? Or it's just a difference in degrees. It's maybe dropped from 700 to 400. As women age and as they approach, the menopause, and I've never quite figured out why it's called the menopause. I'm sure it's just an ancient term. Right. There's actually an earlier phase. So the earlier phase is called perimenopause, which just means near or around. Peri-workout nutrition is the terms everybody likes to use. So it's just like around menopause. And on average, it might occur in the 40s. It can actually occur much earlier than that. Like we typically think of menopause as about age 50. It starts earlier than that with perimenopause, but it can start even earlier than the 40s. And basically what's happening is as a woman is essentially running out of eggs, her reproductive system is starting to literally shut down. So with perimenopause, there's an early and a late phase that have slight differences, and it's just kind of this gradual shutdown of the system, where first it's like progesterone starts to go down, because progesterone's a primary role is to the endometrium, right, is what's get formed for the egg to implant into for pregnancy. Progesterone maintains that. Actually, the egg produces progesterone. So once you stop releasing eggs, the endometrium doesn't have to be generated. You don't start making any progesterone, so estrogen becomes very dominant. And then as you go into later perimenopause, there's another set of hormonal changes, and then basically you go through full-blown menopause, which is defined as no cycle, no menstruation for a year straight. Right. So I actually got a friend going through this, and a woman can have like a 47-year-old woman might have no cycle for 11 months. And then if she menstruates, you reset the clock. They reset the counter to zero. So once an older woman has not had a cycle for a year, she is considered to have entered menopause. And with this, like I said, the system just shuts down. You are no longer getting LH and FSH. You are no longer getting estrogen production at the ovaries. Obviously, an egg is not being released. Progesterone is not being released. So our hormones don't drop to zero. Especially locally, one thing that I think goes underappreciated, a lot of hormonal production goes on within our cells, right? Testosterone is converted to estrogen within fat cells, for example. Cortisol is metabolized within fat cells and be activated and inactivated. So even though a woman's blood estrogen levels may be very low, her tissue estrogen levels may be maintained a little bit. If she's still producing testosterone or DHEA, those can be converted. But for the most part, basically, for all practical purposes, hormones drop to effectively zero. It's not, and the numbers are in the book. I haven't looked at it in a while. And at that point, a lot of things go very wrong. Now, a lot of this is related to aging. And, there's actually just addressed a question about this online, is, you'll have a lot of women be like, oh, at menopause, it just becomes impossible to avoid weight gain and you can't lose weight and all this. And the hormonal changes are critical, and I'll come back to those. But a lot of what goes on with aging is we're just less active. It really does, it really comes down kind of like we want it to be metabolic and hormonal, and it's really just we sit on our ass more, right? We know that non-exercise activity thermogenesis can vary 2,000 calories between two people. When you're active and young and moving, not that anybody in the modern world is anymore, but it's very different than when you get older and you start to move around less. And we know this because, going back in the day, there was always this assumption that with age, you lose muscle, you lose fitness, you lose performance, you gain weight. And now we have a growing population of masters athletes that are proving this to be untrue. That, yes, there's an age-related reduction that you cannot avoid. Power and strength go down faster than endurance. There's always an age-related slowing of metabolic rate. But you've got women in their 50s and beyond entering bodybuilding contests and getting into shape with diet and lifestyle. Is it easy? Of course not. I'm not saying it doesn't get harder. So some of the changes in menopause, right? And we didn't really talk about it with the menstrual cycle. Estrogen gets blamed for a lot of problems in women's bodies. And it's not. Estrogen is the good hormone. Progesterone is the nasty hormone. Progesterone does a lot of really, really, really nasty shit in the body. You have to have it for a number of reasons, but women that get put on progesterone only hate it. They feel terrible. Estrogen improves leptin sensitivity in the brain, improves insulin sensitivity, improves muscular remodeling from training, decreases inflammation. It's critical for cognitive function. Like when estrogen levels drop at menopause or in amenorrhea, this is when the problems start. So with menopause, just in general, you get an increase in insulin resistance, which means the body is not responding as well to insulin. There tends to be a loss of muscle mass. There is not only an increase in body weight, but an increase in body fat, along with the shift from the typical women's lower body fat to more central male fat pattern. And this increases, women go from being very protected from heart disease to having a drastically increased risk of heart disease because they develop this male fat pattern. Their androgen levels may become slightly more relatively, their testosterone may go up a little bit, but it's more that it's just relatively more dominant because estrogen is low. And all these things are not good. Bone density starts to be lost at an accelerated rate, and metabolic rate drops faster than it otherwise would. Finally, there is fat mobilization is impaired at menopause. So all of this adds up to a problem. The fat mobilization thing is actually super easy. Just take caffeine before exercise, sort of, because it blocks adenosine out of the fat cells. But whatever. So caffeine. This brings us to hormone replacement therapy, which is very controversial. I address it in the book in some detail, right? There's been a lot of fear over it because of what's called the Women's Health Initiative study that was going to increase breast cancer risk. As they've reparsed this data, it has to do a lot, whether hormone replacement therapy, and here they're basically giving women synthetic estrogen and progesterone. It's similar in scope to birth control, but it's slightly different forms. There's also been a lot of interest in androgen replacement and giving women low doses of testosterone. That's not quite as well accepted, but it's becoming more and more. We're realizing that's super important because, gotta keep grandma jacked and horny, basically. It sounds facetious, but that's actually a big part of it. It has to do with sex drive. There's also some thought, right? So the issue with breast cancer is estrogen can cause proliferation of breast tissue and cause cancer. Giving women androgens after menopause will cause the testosterone to be converted to estrogen where it needs to be, but that can't occur in the breast. The enzyme isn't available there. So giving women androgens only might provide estrogen signaling without increase. Very new research. They haven't really gotten very far with it. I found that by luck. But this early study found that women who were given hormone replacement therapy had a drastically increased risk of breast cancer. They shut down the study. The data has been reanalyzed, and a lot of it was that they were grouping women from 50 to 70 and just – again, we were getting this average response. And now what it looks like is that if you start hormone replacement within the first 5 years of menopause, limit it to about 10 years of use, I think. Don't swear me to the 10-year number. Been a while since I looked at that data. It's as you get older, it becomes more of a problem. So used early for relatively shorter periods of time, not an issue. Used later in a woman's life, it may cause more problems. So there's also the issue. Like I said, Well, I'll just say that as a man, like, it's not my place to give a woman, to tell her what she should, she needs to address this with her health practitioner. I am glad as a male that I never have to make that choice, because it's not a simple one. It's a choice everyone. And I've talked to some OBGYNs. They think, the breast cancer risk, and this is not to even try to dismiss how horrible breast cancer is. Like, do not hear that at all. It's just a horrific situation for anyone to have to go through. It is somewhat overstated. Postmenopausal women die of heart disease at a far greater rate. Again, I'm not trying to, dismiss isn't the right word, but make breast cancer.
Not trying to downplay it.
Yeah, thank you, to downplay that by any stretch. Now, my feeling based on the literature is that the benefits of hormone replacement for most women outweigh the negatives. Because without hormone replacement, you get increased body fat, a greater slowing, and even the slowing of metabolic rate. We're talking 14 calories a year versus 2, right? We're talking 140 calories a decade versus 40. We're not talking again, most of it's activity. The resting metabolic rate effect is very, very, very small. The bone density loss is a big concern. The muscle loss is a big concern. The gain in body fat, all of this that occurs that is reversed by hormone replacement, the cognitive risks. Now, if a woman has a familial risk of breast cancer, right, grandmother, mother, whatever, if she's got the BRCA, the breast cancer, if she knows she's got that gene that predisposes it, she might make a very different choice. Believe it or not, breast size does play a role here. Simply because the larger your breast, the more breast cells you have to potentially turn cancerous. Women with larger breasts are just slightly higher. So hopefully we're going to get to the point where where physicians or OBGYNs will be able to determine if it's appropriate for any given woman. And there may be a way to, whether it's also doses being used now are much lower than previously. And this is true for birth control as well. The risk profile is very, very different. So again, overall, unless a woman knows she is at high risk for breast cancer, my feeling based on the literature is that the negative changes without hormone replacement are far outweigh the potential negatives of going on it. That said, and I'll come back to bioidenticals because everybody will want to hear about it. I do address in the book, I have a laundry list. A number of supplements have been examined to address either the negative health effects or there's something, they call it the climacteric. It's a German word. There's this cluster of negatives that occur after menopause. Things like hot flashes, cognitive disturbances, mood swings. There's actually vaginal atrophy, which has to do with the lack of estrogen signaling. Vaginal wetness goes down. There's on top of a million other things, and it's called the climacteric, which I think it suggests storm to me. Just honestly, I think they're just like, it is the storm of negatives that occur at menopause. I never did bother to track down what the origin. I think it's a German term because all the best terms are. Anyway, so there's this so I address a lot of supplements that have been examined for that can either offset these problems, whether it's the side effects or the health effects. There's actually a couple that are so seemingly simple. Melatonin, believe it or not, has a laundry list of benefits for women after menopause, including the decreased body fat, less loss of muscle, just huge effects. DHEA, which is an adrenal androgen, has been shown to have similar effects. Again, this kind of goes to that. You're not only providing some androgens, but you're providing some estrogenic signaling, soy protein, phytoestrogens, things of that nature. So, like I said, I try to address it from a scientific standpoint, and I know there's a lot going on with this, but so then let's talk about bioidentical hormones, right? Typically, menopause has been treated, hormone replacement therapy has used, I don't know why this is, conjugated equine estrogen, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's synthetic horse estrogen. I don't know why they use this. They picked this 50 years ago and I don't have an answer. I find it bizarre. Don't know. And then they use a type of progesterone. It's actually very similar to what's in the Depo-Provera shot. That's traditionally what's been used. And even with birth control, they use synthetics. And I didn't get into that because that's a 4-hour discussion. And there's been interest in recent years, right? We know that synthetics don't have quite the same effect in women's bodies. The synthetic estrogen they use in birth control is far more potent than a woman's normal estrogen. I believe the same is true for conjugated equine estrogen. So there's been this big interest in bioidentical hormones. And by that, I mean synthetic versions of what your body makes. So women's bodies, the primary estrogen is 17-beta estradiol, mainly important in premenopausal women. There's estriol and estrone. One's more important during pregnancy and the other's more important in menopause, and I forget which is which. So there's been some interest in that. And, Suzanne Summers was the big one pushing that most of the claims in the science are very divergent. The claims that these solve all the problems, not true. The science is very new and developing. At worst, they're just as good as the synthetic versions. However, they may reduce the risk of certain things. There's always been a problem with thromboembolisms being thrown from the synthetic estrogen, some other issues. The bioidenticals seem to avoid that. So at worst, they're just as good. They may have some slight benefits. It's a very unregulated field. It's still unknown what the optimal form or dosage is. Some people have suggested that bioidentical 17-beta estradiol. The problem is synthetic progesterone can't be taken orally, like the bioidentical progesterone. So they're looking at micronized progesterone, and actually that's often used intravaginally for absorption. And then they're also looking at potential androgen replacements. So this is a developing area of research that I'm sure by next year, everything I wrote in the book will be more or less out of date because it's just happening so quickly. So that's another thing to consider. But again, nobody really knows the ideal doses, and a lot of the compounding pharmacies are just making it up. You can find docs to write prescriptions for anything you want, and it may or may not be ideal. So these are kind of the issues with menopause. The fundamentals don't change, right? Obviously, the masters athletes are proving that if you maintain a high activity level, if you are still in control of your lifestyle, clearly you can still get there. It's just our lifestyles do tend to change. So the hormonal changes cannot be ignored, but most of it is really just age-related inactivity. And our diets get – I would say, and this is something I address in detail in the book, because women in the follicular phase versus women in the luteal phase, different physiologies. They're very insulin sensitive, use a lot of carbs in the first half, insulin resistant, use more fat in the second half. I actually give two different diets. Because if you're insulin sensitive, high carb, low fat tends to be superior. If you're insulin resistant, lowered carb, higher fat tends to be a little bit superior. So this is something for women at menopause to look at. If they don't go on hormone replacements, they tend to develop insulin resistance. They will feel better. Their hunger will be better under control if they use a lowered, not necessarily very low, I'm talking 40% of total calories, lowered carb diet with higher protein and higher fat. Now, going back in general, between this and volume 2, if there are two lessons, even if women ignore 95% of what I wrote, if there's a single thing that I want all women to get out of this book, it is eat sufficient protein, perform proper resistance training. Everything else is negotiable. And that sounds hyperbolic, but it's really not. Women biologically tend not to like protein as much as men. They don't have the taste for it. They may not be raised on it. We're finding the benefits of higher protein intake are staggering, both at premenopause, but especially as we age. We are finding that the body becomes anabolically resistant to protein. It causes muscle loss. That causes what causes sarcopenia. Eventually, you end up in a chair that you can't get out of. And we're talking, they now know, they're thinking double what we used to think was required, as much as 1.5 grams per kilo, up from 0.8. We're talking 0.7 to 0.8 grams per pound, which a lot of women will see that number and go, oh my God, that's 120 grams of protein. Look, 4 ounces of chicken, which is about what fits in your hand, is 30 grams of protein. A can of tuna is 30 grams of protein. Greek yogurt is 13 grams of protein. 4 meals, as long as you have 3 or 4 ounces of protein at each of those meals, you'll crack 120 without even trying. But what women do is they have a bagel for breakfast, they have a salad for lunch, they have a chicken breast for dinner, and they're not getting enough protein. So that proper resistance training, critical for maintaining muscle mass, maintaining bone density in the long run, right? I'm not talking about pissing around with 3-pound dumbbells. It needs to be sufficiently heavy, challenge the skeletal muscle, load the bones. We're talking heavy, challenging sets of 8 to 12 repetitions. Has a number of benefits for fat loss too. But postmenopausal, said, if you're on hormone replacement, you keep carb carbs higher and fat lower, everyone should get enough protein. Insulin resistant, if you don't go on, they'll feel better and have more energy and more stable and calorie control, moderating carbs. So that's a place that the postmenopausal woman who chooses not to go on hormone replacement should consider modifying her diet. And I just find that most women, they overeat carbs and fat and they undereat protein. Especially they love carbs. I've been fighting with my mom for years. She's like, I had a half English muffin for breakfast. No wonder you're hungry an hour later. Like, for goodness sake. Right. And it's like, put a slice of turkey and some cheese on there. God almighty. Dip it in Greek yeast, anything. So those are some of the issues that occur with aging.
Yeah, that was a great breakdown for the people, for the ladies that are, maybe approaching menopause, stuff like that. And then I think it's super empowering too, because it seems so complicated, which it is. However, if people just stay active, pay attention to their nutritional intake, so get the protein like Lyle said. And then maybe if I could just add a third is like, pay attention to your fiber intake too. If you could knock those three out, like that would be incredible. Like you're, 80+% of the way there.
Basically, yeah, and that's sort of like the base. If I was, like my rapid fat loss handbook and like the base of good nutrition, like protein, sufficient fiber, I would add essential fatty acids, like get those three right, and the rest will kind of sort themselves out. Again, the dietary protein thing, it controls hunger better than it kills me that the traditionally trained registered dietitian will just go on and on about how carbs are more filling than fat. Well, a little bit, but they're so intellectually dishonest because they don't like protein. They just fucking hate diets for some reason. Nope, you only need the RDA, and that's what the handbook says. Like, but you're wrong. You're wrong. And I've got 2 decades of literature to say that you're wrong. They will never say that protein controls hunger better than either of the other two. And I just find that so disingenuous. And I just someone I knew she's had, the typical history of dieting, and I got reading high protein. She's like, oh my God, this is a life hack. This is all I ever had to do to feel better energetically, blood sugar control. Like, it's just profound. And, it's, so we talk about pathological dieting, and women cut calories too hard. They'll overconsume carbs, endless cardio, and they don't get the results they want. Then what do you see online? They get into weight training, proper weight training. They're lifting heavy. They cut the cardio back. And invariably part of that subculture is, what do? They eat more protein. They moderate their carbs. And it's like a damn magic trick. Over 2 months later, they've gotten more results than they got in 2 years of the cardio grind. And it's a lot of things going on. It's they're finally above the energy availability threshold. Their cortisol's down. They're getting proper resistance training. That has benefits. Fuelization. This is in the book. I talk about this. And I think if you look at the most successful female dieters, right or wrong, it is the physique dieters. It is the strength power athletes. What are they doing? They are combining proper, heavy, progressive resistance training with sufficient protein. Yeah, again, physique dieters do a lot of stuff that's pathological too, but they're eating all the fibrous vegetables in the world, often too many, but whatever. To a first approximation, that success, that trite success leaves clues thing. They are even men, right? When men want to get in shape, when men love protein and fat. Men love ketogenic diets. They love eating any diet that says you can eat bacon and steak all day. And what do? They go to the weight room. Women, I want to lose weight. They eat nothing but carbs, and they go to the cardio deck. And this is a place where men sort of intuitively, socially, culturally, biologically kind of do what the women should be doing. And when you get women to start doing that, again, it has a bunch of other metabolic effects. And I hated to put this in the book, and I hate this phrase, but I'll use it anyway. When women start doing that progressive weight training and cutting their carbs, and they start depleting muscle glycogen, and it has all these other metabolic effects. And basically, in a sense, they're making their metabolisms a little bit more like men's in terms of fuel utilization. And they turn themselves into a fat-burning machine. And I find I praise so much, but it's true.
That's a Sisson term, isn't it? A Mark Sisson term.
It just hurts me.
Yeah.
But women's bodies tend to use fat during exercise aerobic exercise, but they burn carbs the rest of the day. Men burn carbs during exercise and use fat the rest of the day. And when you get women to take this approach, it shifts their body. When they deplete muscle glycogen, their body shifts to using fat the rest of the day and all these other. So it's basically shifting them to, they're not just burning a tiny bit of fat during the hour of aerobics. They're burning fat 24/7. And that's when the magic happens. It's getting them to do it that's usually the hard. Like, once you get them there, they fight it so hard. I don't want to get bulky. I don't trust me. Every guy in the gym's trying to get bulky and failing. You don't have it. Trust me. You don't. It's not going to. Don't worry about it. It's always a fight getting them to do it. But once they do, they never look back. Once they do it, once you get them to do it for a couple months, and even the weight training thing, I found that once you can get them over that fear of lifting heavier weights, and I don't mean you got to do 5x5. I don't mean you got to go do powerlifting. I'm saying getting away from foofing around for 20 repetitions to challenging themselves. Even if it's a challenging set of 12, I don't care how you do it. It doesn't have to be super max weights. Once they feel that increase in strength, once they see the benefits, whether it's visually or just physically, suddenly things, I remember a client, I'll never forget this, and she came in and she wanted to lose weight and the standard stuff, and it was week 3, and she was getting frustrated, and then she came in the next week and she said, you know what? I went hiking with my kids and my family, and this is the first time I was able to not only keep up, but carry one of my kids on my back and not be exhausted. And boom, her mind was blown.
That's amazing.
That there was more to this than just the weight loss. That it was empowering, and like, I know that word gets overused, or the first time, and again, this is not to be like, oh, women are too weak to do this, but frequently they just have a different physical structure. They've not traditionally been allowed to do this or been accepted to do this. It's funny watching it change. As much as Instagram has done harm, women are seeing other women powerlifting and Olympic lifting and still just not getting bulky and doing these things. I'm seeing this drastic increase in women wanting to do this once they get over this fear. And once they're like, holy shit, I was able to take out that big ass heavy recycle bin by myself. I was able to do the manly thing and carry 16 bags of groceries in by myself. And once it happens, they're unstoppable. Like, suddenly their whole mindset shifts, and they're just like, and again, they may not want to compete or powerlift. And I'm not saying that if a woman doesn't get that, she's wrong or not doing it right. But frequently, once you get them there, it just changes their entire outlook. And suddenly they want to see, like, how far can I go with this? I like feeling strong. The other extent of it, and I know we need to wrap up, I had a client, and I tended to train beginners, for basic training, and I got a note from her husband, and I guess what had happened was they were roughhousing, and her legs got very strong. A lot of women's do. And I guess she basically just kicked him across the room. And he sent a note that said, if you make her any stronger, I'm going to quit writing the checks. That's awesome. I love training women to embarrass men in the gym. It makes me so happy on so many levels. And it was just like, she loved it. He was not quite as pleased. And but yeah, once that happens and they see the tangible benefits beyond just appearance, it's like I said, and get them eating enough protein, and suddenly their appetite is just like, wow, I'm not hungry 2 hours later because I'm getting protein at every meal. I think that's where the physique and strength power athletes have it right as much as they can frequently get psychotic about it. They're some of the most successful dieters, and there's lessons to be learned. Like I said, it's a hard push to get women there, but once you do, they'll never look back.
Absolutely, man. That's awesome. You've been super generous with your time. So I want to plug the book, the Female Fat Loss book, which I have. I'd highly recommend it. So we're going to link up to that in the show notes. Lyle's also got 10 other books that you've written?
It's like 12, 13. I've got some little booklets and, of varying topics. It's all you can find them. I have a new store now called store.bodyrecomposition.com. Everything's there. The women's book, it's long. It's a big book, right? 438 pages. And this is volume 1. This is just nutrition and fat loss and muscle gain. Volume 2 will be training, partially written. The idea of going back to this to write. Usually I take about 3 years between projects. The idea of having to go back to this kind of fills me with dread, but the volume 2 won't be nearly as hard, or I think, and a lot of it's already written. I'm very active on Facebook. My Facebook group is called Body Recomposition, and a lot of women, we're getting a lot of women's issues, and this has been the case for a while. I have a forum. It's dead. Forums are dead in the era of Facebook. My website, I've got over 500 articles at bodyrecomposition.com. The book is available hard copy, PDF, Kindle. If you're an international listener, I can ship anywhere. International shipping is brutal right now. It's like $25 to Canada and over 30 anywhere else in the world. So ebooks are the way to go, honestly.
Perfect, man. So I'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. And thanks so much for coming on. Tons of knowledge there, and I know that people are going to get a ton of use out of this.
Very good. All right,
man. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
See you guys on the next episode. So that's the conclusion to part 2 of the female fat loss interview with Lyle McDonald. I hope you guys enjoyed that and got a lot from it. If you did, reviewing the podcast in iTunes really helps it grow, and that's how we reach more people with this awesome information. So I'd really appreciate that. And other than that, that's it. So I'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye.